today. There was another rejection that has had a far greater impact on all of humanity than LeBron James's rejection of Iguodala in that game. And I know that we continue to go back to this series of verses and this book in the Bible over and over again, but it is so incredibly significant to the church and to the world what takes place in the book of Genesis and our theological understanding of what takes place in Genesis. And so I want to read for us Genesis 2:15 through 17. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, we know what happens next. That happens in Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 3, the fall happens. And the reason that we call it the fall is because Adam and Eve chose to reject God and reject the command of God and ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so the significance of that is that when they rejected God as being the one that they leaned upon for the interpretation of what was good and what was evil, when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, now they assumed the responsibility for defining good and evil for themselves. And that has plagued humanity ever since. What we've kind of ended up with in so many different ways, if we've, as a society and as a culture all over the world, regardless of what culture you look at, we end up with this casserole of where we throw in a little bit of God's commands and a whole lot of our interpretation of what is good and what is evil. And we mix this whole thing up, and then that's kind of what we eat out of until somebody gets sick and starts throwing up. And then we begin saying, oh, well, maybe that ingredient is not exactly how it should be. Let's try this one instead. That's kind of what happens within the context of our society. That's why things that used to be corruptible, right, are now becoming acceptable.